Forget the cinematic versions of war you have seen on the silver screen, because they are nothing but loud lies. Today we are stripping away the classified layers of a legend that was never intended to reach the light of day. Imagine a scenario where a single man is dropped into the emerald furnace of the Southeast Asian jungle. He carries no heavy ordnance, no screaming radio, and no visible fear. He is a shadow with a blade, a human ghost whose presence was initially dismissed as a bureaucratic joke. The elite fighters of the base mocked him as a mere tourist, but within days, their laughter disintegrated into a primal, shivering dread. This Australian operative performed feats that seemed to rewrite the laws of physics. He navigated lethal minefields as if they were empty playgrounds, and neutralized entire squads without ever pulling a trigger. He turned the wilderness itself into a weapon of psychological terror, convincing his enemies that they were being hunted by something supernatural. How did one lone corporal bring an entire organized army to its knees using nothing but the sound of his own breathing? Why did the high command try to scrub his name from every official record? And what is the terrifying secret he carried back into the silence? This is the untold history of Corporal Logan, the phantom who taught the world's most elite special forces how to breathe like the dead. You need to stay until the very final moment, because the twist at the end changes every single thing you think you know about survival. Forward Operating Base 2, located in the jagged terrain of Khartoum, was far from a standard military installation. It was a pressure cooker of raw aggression, fueled by an overdose of testosterone, the jarring vibrations of rock music, and the suffocating stench of aviation fuel. The year was 1968, and the facility operated under its own brutal logic, where the official rulebooks had long since been discarded in favor of primitive survival instincts. Amidst the endless drone of rotor blades and the fortress of sandbags, a chaotic energy reigned, a madness that the American Rangers called controlled, but any sane observer would have identified as an asylum. The Special Forces soldiers, adorned with trophy amulets and wielding massive machine guns, believed they were the kings of the canopy. They were certain that the deafening volume of their weapons and the sheer audacity of their strikes could shatter any enemy resolve. They had no idea that the noisy rhythm of their war was about to be broken by a single man whose arrival would force even the most battle-hardened veterans to ask questions they were not prepared to answer. On a stifling afternoon where the heat climbed past 35 degrees in the shade, a lone helicopter lacking any identifying unit markings touched down on the scorching metal pad. No strike team emerged from the cabin. No crates of ammunition or food were unloaded. Instead, a solitary man stepped onto the runway, his appearance immediately triggering a wave of mockery from the soldiers of Cobra Team. This was Corporal Logan, a man officially attached to the unit via an exchange program from the Australian Special Air Service Regiment. To the Americans, he did not look like an elite warrior. He looked like a drifter who had taken a wrong turn into a combat zone. He wore no heavy ceramic armor, no steel helmet, and none of the elaborate tactical gear the Americans used to define their status. His fatigues were faded by sun and salt. A soft-brimmed hat sat low on his brow, and his entire kit consisted of a single bag and a rifle that looked as if it had been dragged through a meat grinder. The most provocative detail was the massive Fairbairn Sykes dagger strapped handle down to his chest. To Sergeant Rico, a man known as Bulldozer for his love of destruction, this was a joke. He loudly joked that the command had sent them a kindergarten teacher or a lost tourist. The base erupted in laughter, unaware that this man with a knife would soon be the only reason any of them would survive the coming week. Captain Marcus Stone, the leader of Cobra Team, looked at the transfer papers with a growing sense of unease. The documents were thinner than a cheap menu, stating only that Logan was assigned for deep reconnaissance tasks for an indefinite period. There were no evaluations, no mission logs, just a dry stamp of approval. Stone, who trusted his instincts more than paperwork, felt a chill as he watched the newcomer move. While his men saw a weakling, Stone saw an absolutely terrifying economy of motion. Logan did not walk. He seemed to flow across the earth. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, scanned the perimeter not as a soldier, but as a predator assessing a new hunting ground. He registered every shadow and every exit without ever lingering on a single face. The initial introduction was freezing. Logan refused the offered beer, ignored the traditional mission debriefing, and remained silent in the face of Rico's taunts. Instead, he sat in the corner of the barracks and began to sharpen his dagger with a frightening, rhythmic obsession. For the Americans, used to volume and bravado, this silence was more than annoying. It was alarming. They did not understand that Logan was not there to make friends or trade stories. He was a practitioner of a different philosophy, one of stealth, precision, and total absence. Captain Stone noticed that Logan did not just check the tripwires, he felt the tension with his fingertips while his eyes were closed. He could sit motionless for hours until his breathing became so shallow his chest barely moved. Stone told his deputy that Logan was not there to learn from them, but because the Americans were too loud to survive the jungle. But the men of Cobra ignored the warning, viewing Logan as a kangaroo with a rifle, a headquarters mistake. They prepared for Operation Nightingale, expecting an easy walk and another victory. They cleaned their machine guns and laughed at the silent Australian who was currently checking his bootlaces with the meticulous precision of a surgeon. None of them knew that in 48 hours their laughter would turn into screams, and the Phantom would become their only hope of escaping the hell that had already opened its gates. The mission began with a deceptive, heavy calm. 6 men of Cobra Team pushed through the suffocating undergrowth, their boots sinking into the rotting decay of the jungle floor. The intelligence brief had promised a simple recon of a logistics depot, but the silence was too thick. The birds were gone, the insects were mute, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with hidden malice. While Rico and the others pushed forward aggressively, snapping branches and whispering on the radio, Logan moved like liquid smoke. He paused every few meters to taste the air, his slowness infuriating the team. But just as Rico was about to bark an order to pick up the pace, the green wall of the forest exploded. It was a masterfully orchestrated execution. 3 hidden machine gun nests opened fire from the ridge, and mortar shells began to bracket the team in a tightening noose of fire. Panic, sharp and cold, hit the hearts of the Americans. Stone's radio was jammed, and they were trapped in a kill zone designed to end them in less than 60 seconds. As the team pressed their faces into the mud, Logan did the unthinkable. He did not fire his weapon. He dropped his pack and sprinted directly toward the source of the fire. Ignoring the tracer rounds buzzing like hornets around his head, he dove into a cluster of roots. His predator eyes had spotted what the others had missed. 3 claymore mines rigged to vaporize the team the moment they tried to retreat. With hands as steady as a clockmaker's, he pulled his dagger and sliced the tripwires with millimetric precision, disarming the explosives while shells impacted only 10 meters away. But this was only the start of the dance. As the enemy moved down the slope to finish them, Logan grabbed a discarded grenade launcher and fired a single round into a mangrove swamp to their left. The explosion created a wall of mud and water that served as a distraction. He grabbed Stone by the shoulder and pointed into the black, foul-smelling abyss of the swamp, a route no map marked as passable. It was either the sludge or the body bags. For the next 45 minutes, they crawled through the intestines of hell. They submerged themselves in waist-deep muck, the scent of rot filling their lungs. They moved under the roots while enemy patrols walked just meters above them. Leeches the size of fingers fed on their necks, but no one dared to move. Logan navigated the labyrinth without a compass, guided only by the flow of water and the shift in temperature. When they finally emerged miles away, covered in filth and shivering from adrenaline, the reality hit them. They were alive because the man they had mocked had found a back door only a phantom could see. Skepticism died in that swamp. Rico, wiping mud from his eyes, looked at Logan with a new, fearful reverence. The Australian did not want thanks. He simply sat on a log, pulled a leech from his skin, and began to clean his rifle with the same haunting calmness he had shown at the base. The relief of survival after the ambush was short-lived, for the jungle had prepared a new psychological torture that was driving the men of the base to the brink of madness. For 7 consecutive nights, exactly at 200 hours, the humid darkness would be torn apart by the rhythmic thumping of mortar fire. It was always the same pattern. 3 high-explosive rounds dropped with mathematical precision into the center of the compound, followed by a silence so deep it felt heavy. This was a calculated campaign of sleep deprivation, orchestrated by a mortar crew that moved like shadows. The enemy would fire, dismantle their weapon, and vanish into the labyrinth of the rainforest before the first siren could even begin to wail. These nightly visits turned elite soldiers into shivering wrecks, waiting for the next whistle of doom. Captain Stone, fueled by sleepless nights, responded with the only language the American war machine understood: overwhelming, catastrophic firepower. Every night after the first shell landed, the sky would light up as artillery pounded the surrounding hills, and jets dropped canisters of napalm, turning the jungle into a raging inferno. They burned acres of vegetation, convinced no human could survive such an apocalypse. Yet the next night, at exactly 200 hours, the mortars would fall again, mocking their efforts. The enemy was ghosting through the flames, untouched and unafraid. It was then that Corporal Logan broke his silence. He watched the burning horizon with a look of utter disdain and quietly remarked that burning the forest to catch a mouse was not a strategy, but an act of desperation. While the rest of the camp prepared for another night of loud, useless bombardment, the Australian Phantom began his own silent preparation. He did not load up ammunition or grenades. In a move that looked like madness to the watching sentries, Logan stripped off his heavy combat vest and left his rifle on his bunk. He dressed in dark, lightweight fatigues and took only 2 items: his razor-sharp dagger and a tightly coiled roll of thin, strong communications wire. He was not going out to fight a war, he was going out to hunt. He slipped over the perimeter wire just as the sun dipped below the horizon, disappearing into the black void without a sound. He did not look for the mortar position. He looked for the path the enemy used to escape. He knew that creatures of habit, even ghosts, leave a trace. For the next 6 hours, the base waited. The artillery was silent on Logan's request. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock, and then, for the first time in a week, 200 hours came and went in absolute, blessed silence. As the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the mist, a lone figure emerged from the tree line. It was Logan. He walked with a casual, almost bored gait, covered in mud but strangely devoid of any scratches. He walked straight into the command bunker and placed a heavy metal object on the map table with a dull clank. It was the optical sighting mechanism of a Soviet-made mortar, still warm and smeared with a dark crimson substance that was definitely not mud. He had not fired a single shot, yet he had dismantled the entire enemy operation with the intimacy of a surgeon. The full, horrific extent of what happened was only revealed 2 days later, when a long-range patrol stumbled upon the mortar site. What they found made even the hardest veterans turn away in sickness. The 3-man enemy crew had not been struck by shrapnel or bullets. They were found at their posts, neutralized one by one in total silence, dragged into the darkness by a force they never saw coming. From that night on, the shelling stopped forever, replaced by a fearful respect for the man who could walk into the heart of darkness and make the monsters disappear. Later, Cobra Team stumbled upon a discovery that intelligence analysts would call the find of the month. Deep within a valley that did not officially exist on any tactical map, they found a fully operational enemy logistics base. It was a fortress hidden under the canopy, complete with bunkers, supply caches, and a perimeter guarded by dozens of alert sentries. The air smelled of wood smoke, indicating a troop concentration that outnumbered the 6-man American team by at least 20 to 1. For Captain Stone, this was the moment of truth. His training dictated an immediate, aggressive response. Call in the heavy artillery and unleash a torrent of fire. He reached for his radio, his thumb hovering over the transmit button, ready to bring down the thunder. But just as he was about to initiate a sequence that would lead to a chaotic firefight, a dirty hand firmly pushed the radio antenna down. It was Logan. He shook his head slowly, his eyes locked on the encampment with a cold, calculating intensity. Without uttering a word, he conveyed a message louder than any shout. Attacking now would be suicide, and bombing them would destroy the intelligence they were sent to gather. What followed was a masterclass in the art of invisibility. Logan began to strip away his identity as a soldier, removing his heavy webbing, laying down his rifle, and even discarding his noisy combat boots. He stood there in nothing but his socks and faded fatigues, armed only with his fighting knife and a small canvas pouch. He was preparing to walk unarmed into the lion's den. Logan signaled for the team to maintain absolute radio silence, and then he simply dissolved. One moment he was standing next to Rico, and the next he was gone, merging with the shadows so perfectly that his own teammates lost sight of him within 3 seconds. The next 2 hours were an agonizing exercise in terror for the men of Cobra Team. They lay pressed into the mud, watching the sun crawl across the sky. They imagined Logan captured or killed. Then, as if materializing from the humid air itself, the Phantom returned. He walked into their hiding spot from the rear, moving so silently that Rico nearly jumped out of his skin when a hand touched his shoulder. Logan knelt beside the captain and emptied his pouch. The first item was a folded, hand-drawn map, a complete schematic of enemy supply lines the CIA had spent years trying to find. But it was the second item that drained the blood from their faces. A small, tarnished brass bell, the kind used by the enemy to rig tripwire alarms. To retrieve that bell, Logan had to have crawled literally under the noses of the guards. He had bypassed the tension mechanism and untied it without making a sound loud enough to wake a sleeping cat. He had held their lives in his hands and chosen to steal their security instead. "They rely too much on noise," Logan whispered, his voice dry. "I removed their ears. Now they are deaf." The enemy below was completely unaware that a ghost had walked among them. In that moment, the legend was cemented. He had defeated an entire battalion with a pocket knife and patience. The operation known as the Snake Pit began when a reconnaissance patrol reported a fortified bunker complex hidden inside a civilian village. It was a nightmare scenario, concrete firing positions and heat signatures of civilians being used as living shields. A frontal assault meant a guaranteed tragedy. The order from high command was cold. Take the bunker at any cost. Artillery was being plotted, but Logan saw a different way. He studied the air vents and improvised chimneys. He understood that the enemy hiding inside was not afraid of bombs anymore. They were afraid of things that crawled and struck in the dark. Logan disappeared into the jungle with a canvas sack and thick gloves. He took no rifle, only his long black dagger. He spent hours as a collector, moving with the patience of a biologist. By sunset, the sack in his hand wriggled with 15 highly agitated snakes, a mix of local venomous species. Under the cover of darkness, Logan crawled to the rear of the bunker and found the ventilation shafts. With painstaking care, he coaxed the snakes into the vents, letting the air currents carry them into the heart of the structure. The first signs of success came within minutes. From beneath the earth rose the sound of primal terror. Men who had trained to withstand artillery suddenly faced an enemy they could not intimidate. Panic spread faster than flame. The enemy fighters burst through the entrances with no discipline, fleeing the unseen horror. They ran straight into the prearranged kill zones of Cobra Team. Remarkably, not a single civilian hostage was injured. The captors had been too consumed by their own fear to maintain control. When dawn arrived, the story spread like wildfire. The official log called it a successful neutralization, but the men spoke of the night the jungle itself became their ally. The final test came in the Valley of Mists. 2 officers had been lost to a silent, surgical marksman who operated with a professionalism that mirrored Logan's own. This enemy shooter was hunting leaders, putting rounds through targets with horrifying efficiency. Logan requested the sector and chose a depressingly exposed patch of low ground as his hide. He lowered himself into the mud until the earth closed around him like a wet cast. He wrapped his rifle in damp cloth and let the monsoon rain wash over him until the distinction between man and ground blurred. For 3 continuous days and nights, he stayed in that hollow. Leeches embedded themselves along his skin, feeding with methodical persistence. Logan did none of the things a normal soldier would do. He let them drink. He practiced the dead man's breathing, consuming minimal oxygen while leaving no visual signature. The turn came on the 3rd day. The rain had eased, and Logan heard it. A brief metallic click followed by a soft mechanical glide. It was the sound of a bolt being drawn back somewhere ahead and above. In that instant, the geometry of the valley rearranged in his mind. He did not need to see a glint of glass. The echo and the delay told him everything. There was a slow exhale, a fractional adjustment, and a squeeze. Logan's weapon spoke once. For a long second, nothing happened. Then a shape shifted in the gray and did not rise again. When the sweep team finally found the rival marksman, he was still in his well-constructed hide, scope aligned with the open patches he had been exploiting. The single wound on his face told the story. The Phantom had outlasted him. From that moment on, whenever anyone mentioned snipers near the base, they spoke more quietly, afraid the echo might wake something still listening from that waterlogged hollow. This was the true nature of Logan, a man who did not fight the war, but became the silent, predatory shadow of it.